The EU's new farm-to-fork strategy involves a massive increase in organic agriculture to help save the planet. Is it radical and visionary, the way of the future? Or is it ideological and dumb and fated for failure? Well, let's have a look. There's nearly 8 billion people on the planet, and even if the rate of growth is slowing down, it's not stopping just yet. So how we feed ourselves is a key question, one that's been crucial to how we got to this point in the first place. In 1798, Malthus predicted that humanity would outstrip its food resources. But that prediction, which was entirely correct given the state of technology at the time, didn't come to pass because the Industrial Revolution happened, and that raised the energy inputs into agriculture, making much higher productivity possible. Then we faced similar questions at the turn of the 20th century, as we had a crisis of soil fertility in the face of increasing population growth. That crisis was resolved with the invention of artificial nitrogen fertilizers. Now we've got to the point where we're producing more food than we ever have before for more people. We've made land massively more productive than it ever was, and yet we face another crisis. Our current food production processes have led to habitat destruction, a decline in biodiversity. Some of that's rather important to us, for instance, pollinators. But all of it is important in the overall food chain and the cycle of life, which we depend upon to varying degrees. At the same time, we have to preserve the fertility of the soil because some agricultural practices have exacerbated soil erosion, although environmentalists claim there are only 30 harvests left or something similar. Those statistics are not true, at least there's no evidence for them. And we also have to defend the productivity against the incidences of pests and diseases and hostile climatic events, some of which we expect to become more frequent or more severe with climate change. But the thing that's really driving change is the decision taken by many of the nations of the world now to decarbonise their economies to reduce the level of increase in global warming. And therefore, agriculture needs to meet all of those other objectives in a way that doesn't contribute to greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide or methane. So whatever else we know that the status quo isn't sticking around for too long. We are on a journey. And it's an area of policy we have to get right. Mess with a system as crucial as your food supply, then obviously you open yourself up to unintended consequences. For an example, you only have to look at what happened when Chairman Mao was told that sparrows reduced the harvest by eating some of the seed corn. He created a nationwide program to get everybody in China to kill all of the sparrows, which they did in a triumph of communistic endeavour. They then discovered that as well as eating some of the seed corn, the sparrows also ate a lot of the insect pests, which then proceeded, in the absence of their predators, to feast on the crops and pretty much to devastate them. Good intentions are not enough. It needs pragmatism, an evidence-based approach, not ideology. All the famines of the last century were caused predominantly by incompetent human agency, not by the vagaries of climate alone. Unfortunately, pragmatism doesn't seem to be wholly in charge. Case in point, the European Union has passed its farm-to-fork strategy. A centrepiece of that strategy is that the land used for organic farming should be increased from the current position, which is 8%, to a massively increased 25%. Organic agriculture is defined as having no synthetic inputs, no synthetic pesticides, no mineral fertilisers. It says that it wants to move agriculture from a status quo, which it says is in competition with nature, to a happier state that is more allied with nature. Which sounds lovely, if you have a taste for meaningless pap. It's an expression of the romantic idea that all that is natural is good, and all that is human-made and hence unnatural is bad, or at least not as good as what is natural. Well, go and get yourself eaten by a lion and ask yourself if it's any comfort that what's happening to you is natural. Nature exists in a constant state of one part denying natural processes to the other part. Eat or be eaten. When you eat wholesome grains, you're denying the crops their ability to lead out their natural life cycle. allied with nature is a poet's ideal, it's not a food policy. It comes down to what problem we think we're trying to solve. So you might assume it would be producing enough of the food that people want to eat. I mean, that's what it's been for centuries. And it's no mean feat in itself, not in a world with 8 billion people in it. So if that's the aim, how does the EU's 25% organic policy match up? Well, not very well, seems to be the answer. Food people want to eat. Well, a modest percentage of the population may value organically grown food for reasons of quality and personal preference. I've even been one of those people. But organic agriculture delivers significantly reduced yields compared to modern intensive farming methods. A meta-analysis of 362 published comparison studies came up with a 20% average reduction in yield from organic farming. Although with a fairly large standard deviation between different types of crops and different locations, the difference could be significantly greater. In addition, a meta-analysis published by Knapp and van der Heyden in 2018 looked at yield stability, the variability and reliability of production across years. They found 15% average reduced yield stability from organic farming. So if the aim is to produce the food that the growing population wants, doing it with a big increase in organic agriculture is going to require that you increase the amount of land that you have under cultivation. That or reduce the amount of food that you grow at home and increase imports, with the expectation that the extra capacity is going to come from somewhere else, presumably somewhere that doesn't use organic agriculture. So that just moves the problem somewhere else, of course. If the EU's policy is counterintuitive on that score, then the fair point response to that is to point out that my version of the exam question was just too simplistic because it's just about feeding people. Actually, of course, there's climate change and other environmental degradation to take account of. So we have to amend the objective to something like this: producing enough of the food that people want to eat with ultimately net zero greenhouse gas emissions and other environmental impacts. That doesn't magically make the EU's 25% organic policy make sense. Actually, rather the opposite. For sure, the research suggests that organic farming is more efficient in its use of non-renewable energy. It maintains or improves soil quality. It has reduced negative impacts on water quality and certain biodiversity measures. It has many things to commend it. But such benefits come at the expense of performance on greenhouse gas emissions. Now, it has one plus side, which is the result of soil carbon sequestration, but that doesn't offset the impact of the lower yields. So that means that the CO2 and methane emissions from organic farming are higher, not lower. That leaves us with a bottom line that makes a nonsense of the EU's policy. Converting a large percentage of land to organic farming will make its agriculture less climate friendly. It's a move that doesn't make sense if we're talking about a pragmatic approach to meeting the bigger goal. And that's not the end of it. The Commission says that in order to provide space for wild animals, plants, pollinators and natural pest regulators, there is an urgent need to bring back at least 10% of agriculture area under high diversity landscape features. So rather than expanding the amount of land to cope with the lower yield organic produce, it's actually aiming to reduce the amount of land overall used for agriculture so it can convert it to rewilding initiatives. Now, those may well be important and required initiatives. The destruction of habitat is the main reason, so far as the research shows, for the decline in biomass and species. And restoring habitats has been seen to have a very beneficial effect in reversing those problems. But surely you can only do that if you increase the productivity of the land that you have. You can't do it at the same time as reducing yields by maybe a fifth. And there are going to be other knock-on effects. Organic food tends to be more expensive because the lower yields mean you're using more land, more inputs. Tim Cullinan, the president of the Irish Farmers Association, told the Food Navigator website, "It's not credible for the EU to drive up production costs for European farmers while at the same time looking for low food prices. They want food produced to organic standards but available at conventional prices." But something still isn't lining up. And that's because my proposed exam question is not, in fact, the implicit exam question you derive from looking at what the EU's doing and then trying to reverse engineer the question that it seems to be answering. Mine presumes that the aim is to produce the food that people want. But people who spend all their time looking at output numbers and emissions and the like, they seem to have a tendency to miss that part altogether. Instead, tending to pursue producing food that provides a healthy amount of calories and nutrients with net zero greenhouse gas emissions and other impacts. Not the food you want, the food they think you should want. Now, the EU attempts a sleight of hand to make it seem like it's all your idea. It says this: citizens want healthy diets from a healthy planet, and they deserve clear information to allow them to make informed choices. As part of this, the policy will promote plant-based products, although it softened an earlier draft that was more explicitly anti-meat. But what if they get all that information, these consumers, and they decide to make choices that are not in line with what you would wish them to? When people get to choose for themselves, they tend to choose meat. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization expects global meat consumption to rise again this year by more than 1%. The fastest growth is taking place in low and middle income countries that have had constrained food choices in the past enforced by poverty, and seem unwilling to embrace such constraints afresh when they have the choice. Largely, the forces driving those trends worldwide are outside of individual government control, barring China levels of authoritarian intervention. Now, okay, you might say, but most of the countries that are embracing higher levels of meat eating are countries that have emerged recently from poverty. That isn't a description of Europe, so surely you could push down meat demand in the EU. The point is that you'll solve the problems that you set out to solve. If you try to make our current diets more sustainable, you will find new and inventive ways to do that. The way that developing countries leapfrog over the resource-intensive development that we went through in the past is by getting direct access to the new technologies and solutions that we've developed without having to go through the polluting intermediary stages. Worldwide, people are not going to abandon meat. So take that as one of your inputs into your equation and see how that changes the policy choices you're making. Because it is a policy choice, whether you seek to reduce the impact of things that people enjoy or whether you seek to persuade them to give up those things. The former is probably easier than the latter, given what we know about human psychology. Plus, it seems weird to opt for organic agriculture if you're going to cram down on people choosing to eat meat. Organic farming is done best when it's in the context of mixed farming, since the animals you raise provide the manure that feeds the soil. The logic of the organic approach struggles when pushed to scale alongside a drive to reduce animal products. You only have to see the impact, for instance, in South Dakota, where the transition of a 34,000-acre farm, Gunsmoke Farm, to organic production by food giant General Mills has led to more soil erosion, not less. Well, I mean, that's weird, right? Organic farming is supposed to be better for the soil. But in that South Dakota area, it's because of the effects of soil tilling, weed suppression from tilling, not from chemicals. But there, that's creating modern-day Dust Bowl effects. The approach doesn't suit the conditions. Context matters. Now, the EU's approach has its defenders, some of whom are esteemed academics, such as Rogier Schulte, a professor of farming systems ecology, and Han Wiskerk, Professor of Rural Sociology, both at Wageningen University in the Netherlands. In an article, they argued that while they recognised that organic farming is just one of many forms of agriculture that contribute to more sustainable food systems, it was being used here because, quote, organic farming is the only system that is internationally accredited and regulated. So wait, you're selecting an approach to agriculture based on what types of regulatory regime you have? That seems like a brave approach. They added this: the assertion that solutions need to be realistic. While that may sound like a truism, we argue that as a society, we have run out of realistic solutions towards sustainable food systems. What now? They said that, for an example, you could look to the Indian state of Sikkim, where a 100% organic target has been implemented against the advice of many who considered it to have been unrealistic. How did they succeed where others have failed? How did they overcome those same barriers that we are facing here? Does our own 25% target suddenly seem a little modest when measured against their success? Now, there are certain arguments that when they're made, you don't even have to have looked yet at the evidence behind them to know that they are stinking of the rotten fish smell of wishful thinking. Let's use the example of an Indian state to prove a counterintuitive proposal for the whole of Europe. Almost certainly there won't be any contextual factors of importance there that are at all different. Almost certainly this will be an apples to apples comparison, right? Well, let's put such nasty scepticism to one side, do what they suggest and have a look at Sikkim. If you do a search on Sikkim, India, organic, you get a lot of true believers high in the search results. So this is obviously a shining beacon of organic hope. Sikkim, the first 100% organic state in the world. Amazing facts about the organic state Sikkim. A 100% organic world is possible. Let's look at one of those. A 100% organic world is possible. The Indian state of Sikkim shows us how. Vandana Shiva says the project is to convert the Himalayas completely to organic agriculture, adding that the aim was to export the Sikkim model to the rest of the world. Well, I'm excited. Are you excited? I mean, okay, Sikkim is a Himalayan state of India. It's the least densely populated state in the country. You might think that's not an ideal comparison for the majority of European countries. Not necessarily the home of the model that will spread across the world, you would think. But even so, 100% organic, eh? In spite of the cynics and the naysayers suggesting it would be so unrealistic. Truly inspiring stuff. So, how did they do on the yield issue? I mean, I guess they must have cracked it, given how successful they've been. Well, let's see if we can find some information on that. One of the first things we turn up is this article in Indian Express. Reality check. Organic agriculture turns bitter fruit for farmers of Sikkim. Launched as an ambitious programme through a resolution passed by the Sikkim Legislative Assembly in 2003, organic farming seems to be floundering on the ground, though, in terms of delivering the expected rewards to farmers. One farmer points out that the same open field plot, which gave about 40 quintals of tomato before he switched to organic farming 8 years ago, now yields just 18 to 20 quintals. And the realisations aren't significantly higher to compensate for the lower yields. The article also tells about how the organic vegetable growers of Sikkim are being undermined because people keep importing non-organic veg for sale at cheaper prices. Weirdly, people seem to prefer to pay the cheaper prices. They're calling for the government to ban such imports. Think about that for a moment. Forcing the population to pay higher prices. Not farming to produce what people want, but forcing people to have what you want to give them. Seemed like an excellent model. I'm sure the citizens of Europe wouldn't see any downsides to that at all. This article, Sikkim's Organic Farming Delusion, also seems relevant. In the past 20 years, the production of staple food grains in Sikkim has declined by an alarming 60%. Even as her population increased from 4 lakhs to 6.5 lakhs. A lakh is 100,000. Over the years, Sikkim, the 100% organic state, has come to heavily depend on other states to feed her people and tourists. Which is all very well, so long as those other states don't follow the same path. So much for exporting the Sikkim model to the rest of the world. The idea that it could be used as a positive model for Europe to follow, even in part, is breathtaking in its utter stupidity. How do you get academics to quote it as evidence for a massive experiment in changing how you grow food? I can only think it's a potent symbol of the power of wishful thinking and self-delusion and confirmation that even the smartest people can end up saying the dumbest things in the name of something that they really want to believe. Now, maybe it doesn't matter. One commenter asked me when I'd announced I'd be doing this video the following question. Bricker and Ibbitson's book, Empty Planet, The Shock of Global Population Decline, claims that population size will not reach the projected levels and will in fact start to decline within the next few decades. Does this open a window to shift focus from quantity to quality of food? There's an interesting longer term question there, which is what will be the implication of a steady state population at whatever level it eventually stabilises. The EU population, governed by rates of births and immigration versus rates of deaths and emigration, is currently predicted to grow in the short term, peaking between 2025 and 2030 and then to decline thereafter. This graph makes it look like it declines a lot, but of course the scale on the left-hand side is important. That decline reflects just a 7% of decline from the 2019 level, and that goes all the way through the coming century. So there's certainly nothing in the short to medium term that suggests that reducing your productivity is a thing we should count on being able to do. When it comes to feeding people, you need to aim high because, of course, some of the crops will fail. Likewise, you're looking to a fairly short-term time horizon when you're planning the quantity that you need. With the deadline of 2030 as part of the EU's Farm to Fork strategy, the organic transition, there's no indication that population is going to be a major factor. We will still be in peak population for that period. Longer term, well, if the proposition of a population collapse turned out to be well-founded, that would have all sorts of implications. So long as our population worldwide continues to grow, the challenge we have is to be capable of meeting the challenge of greater numbers. If that were to change, then you do start to ask other questions about the type of food you can produce in a system that is under less stress. We are not in that situation yet. All right, to wrap up, let me make something clear. This video isn't intended to be pro or anti-organic farming per se. Can organic farming be part of a mix of solutions? Probably, in the right locations where its benefits work to its best advantage and its drawbacks are less important. What this video is intended to be is anti-dogma. Sustainable food systems won't be built like this. The one solution that works, or doesn't actually when you look at it, and now just needs to be spread to the world. One preferred approach, pushed for ideological reasons, with no analysis as to why it suits the purpose and whether it will actually succeed in meeting your stated goals. The fact that the European Union, an allegedly sophisticated part of the modern world, could choose to make such a huge part of its agricultural platform on this sort of basis only just beggars belief. I mean, so much for evidence-led policy, which is what you assume that they're supposed to be following. And why have they done it that way? Because organic agriculture has become the environmentally sacred cow. Well, here's the thing. Environmentally sacred cows may be worse for the planet than the real ones. Plus, the real ones taste better.